The Game's Not Over, In Defense of Football. Author Gregg Easterbrook's on the line with us right now. Greg, good morning to you.
Hey, how are you?
We're doing very well. Thanks for taking time out of your morning for us.
Sure.
We had talked to you about The King of Sports, your book previous to this one, also about football. What set you up to write a follow-up football book right after King of Sports?
Yeah, King of Sports was a little more than 2 years ago. The Game's Not Over, the new book, is a follow-up in some ways. It's a shorter book, and I focus in almost exclusively on the NFL and one question that the NFL raises, in my mind at least, and that's what effect does the incredible popularity of the NFL have on young people, mainly young males, of course. So the book is more limited than the earlier one was. The new one, The Game's Not Over, in some ways it's a defense of football. I think the complaints about the sport have reached a point of exaggeration. A generation ago, things were being covered up and a lot needed to be exposed. Now the pendulum has swung too far in the other direction. So at some levels I'm defending football, but at other levels I'm spelling out what I think is a fairly simple and doable agenda for reform.
You point out, you make note of the November 17th, 1968 Heidi Bowl incident, and you describe that as being the beginning of the football era in America.
Yes, that was 1968, and your listeners too young to remember will know perhaps from those old things called history books that at that time there was only one nationally broadcast NFL game per week, not like not like the football around the clock that we have today. And it turned out that the nationally broadcast game was going down to the final minute, and just when the winner was in doubt, NBC cut away from the game and began showing a regularly scheduled show, in that case a made-for-TV movie version of Heidi. And so that's why it's known as the Heidi game. Unless you were a yodeler, you were very unhappy that NBC cut off the end of the football game.
And even some of them weren't thrilled, Greg.
Even some of the yodelers were complaining.
That's
yes.
right.
So, and it established the precedent that on television, football is more important than anything else. The Germans could be invading Belgium again, and we wouldn't cut away to cover the news of that until after the football game is over. I sort of think that moment is the moment that football began to take off in American life.
Gregg Easterbrook is with us. You must read his weekly column, Tuesday Morning Quarterback. It's now over at the New York Times, at the Upshot blog of the New York Times. You find it there. The new book is The Game's Not Over. It's Riley and Scott on WROK. Let's talk about some of the overarching, critiques and high points, good points about the NFL specifically. You know, we talk about player safety, and you've talked about safety in your column going back years, even before the NFL took a hard look at it, and college football, and high school football, too. I was on Facebook yesterday. Someone linked up a video of football's greatest hits, and these were it was a compilation of the most brutal type of hits we used to see. Receivers who were unable to protect themselves, head-to-head, launching, targeting, all those things. And one of the good things about the NFL these days in terms of safety is we will not see those kind of hits again, and that safety is trickling down into lower levels too.
And I think that's a tremendous improvement. As recently as 5 years ago, the NFL's policy toward concussions and brain trauma was deny everything, Stonewall. They've finally been forced to accept the reality that, of course, football will always be dangerous no matter how it's played, but that deliberate helmet-to-helmet hits are bad. They're not entertaining. They're not necessary for exciting games. The games we're seeing this year are as good as they've ever been, and deliberate helmet-to-helmet contact has almost been eliminated. And it's not so much the NFL players that we care about. Nobody wants an NFL player to get hurt, but there are only 2,000 of them, and they're extremely well paid for the risk they accept. What we want is to set a better example so at the youth and high school levels, kids are not engaging in deliberate helmet-to-helmet contact. And I think as recently as 5 years ago, high school was not dealing with this issue, and now it is, and that's a huge reform. It's not going to decrease in any way from the quality of the sport, but it will make the sport a great deal less dangerous.
And Greg, I've been reading, and you would be in a far better position and have more expertise on this than I, but I've been reading that as far as people going out for football on the middle school and high school level, it has dropped due to so much of this attention on concussions and injuries.
Well, I think that is happening, and I will tell you, some of your listeners may not want to hear me say this, but I think youth football should be banned. The movie that's coming out, Concussion, with Will Smith, about Dr. Bennett Omalu, who is the guy who who makes a lot of claims about what he's found in CTE and deceased football players. He thinks all football below the age of 18 should be banned. When we say football, I mean pads and pads, tackle, wearing helmets. It's certainly not flag football. Flag football is a lot of fun. I wouldn't go that far. I think below middle school age, boys and a few girls should not play football with helmets on, because the research all shows that your brain is much more vulnerable when your body hasn't finished maturing than it is once you reach the NFL level. But don't take my word for it. Take Archie Manning's word. The father of Peyton and Eli Manning would not let Peyton and Eli put on a helmet until they reached middle school, because he knew the medical studies showed that below the age of 13, tackle football is exceptionally dangerous. And in return for what? You can always learn to hit hard later. So I think youth football should be banned, and any parents listening to this program who are discouraging their kids from playing football below middle school age, they shouldn't play tackle football below middle school age. High school football, will high school football lose popularity? Depends on the school system. I think there it's going to be driven largely by litigation.
Right.
High school districts are starting to lose lawsuits over brain injuries, and maybe private schools can afford to bear that expense, but public schools sure can't pay those litigation costs.
Gregg Easterbrook with us. The Game's Not Over, in Defense of Football, his new book, Amazon.com and elsewhere. I saw a quote from you, and this conversation pops up now that we do know some of the risks, and heck, we just found out about Frank Gifford after his death and his apparent CTE that he had too. The question about whether your entertainment value is lessened. You feel bad about enjoying the NFL. You said, I don't think there's any reason why an adult can't make an informed choice to engage in a relatively small risk per year in return for a lot of money. You don't feel bad about enjoying football at the pro level at all.
No, I watch way too many NFL games, and I attend way too many games, including I go to the Super Bowl every year. And I never feel the slightest ethical qualm, because the men who are playing are adults who have been warned about a risk and made a free will choice that, in their case, has a pretty attractive cost-benefit trade-off. A lot of money and a great lifestyle in return for, yes, a risk, but the overall career risk is, I think, relatively low. The cost trade-off for a high school kid can be very different, because you're running the same risk in return for very little chance of getting a recruiting boost to college. So in high school, the benefit for a kid to play on the football team is that football's a lot of fun, and it's a great learning experience. You learn self-discipline and teamwork, and those are important life skills. But the risk you're running is a lot higher relative to your reward than the risk that an NFL player runs. On Frank Gifford, it's the story of the final 3 years of his life is sad. But remember, in his case, let's assume his family's account of his passing is completely true. They say that he didn't begin to show signs of cognitive decline until he was 81 years old. But by his birth year, he should have only lived to the age of 71.
Yeah.
He was already 10 years older than you would expect a male of his birth year to live, and a lot of people, as they reach the end of their life, show cognitive decline.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things. At 81, I can remember my father complaining in, the middle 70s of cognitive decline, and not remarkably so, but there were things that he noticed as well. I don't recall him getting out onto an NFL field.
Well, and I think the big objection to the work, this guy Benedict Omalu, who Will Smith is about to play in the movie theaters, I think he's done very important service in bringing the question of CTE and football into the conversation. That's an important step. But Omalu has only studied the brains of deceased former NFL stars who played in the era when deliberate helmet-to-helmet contact was legal. He hasn't studied anybody else. Now, CTE can only be detected by autopsying the brain of a deceased person. So, for all we know, everybody gets CTE. He's only looked at former NFL players. To have any sense of whether this problem is unique to former NFL players, you would have to have a much broader base of study, and that will take years. So he was right to warn of his initial findings. I just think his initial findings are far from certain at this point.
Gregg Easterbrook with us, Riley and Scott on WROK. Read Tuesday Morning Quarterback at the New York Times Upshot blog. This week, the non-quarterback, non-running back Heisman. That's what the lead discussion's about. His new book, The Game's Not Over, in Defense of Football. Have it linked up on our Twitter feed. You talked about some of the criticisms being overblown, Greg. One of them might be this thinking that the NFL is full of thugs and guys who get arrested all the time, and you actually looked at in the book the statistics, the likelihood that an NFL player will be arrested versus adult males of the same age, and you found...
I found that an NFL player, adult males are 3 times, as a group of the same age of NFL players, 3 times more likely to be arrested than guys in the NFL. So when Ray Rice, Greg Hardy, these are very troubling incidents, but we notice them because they're NFL stars. Males of the same age are more likely to be arrested. Now, is this because NFL's police will look the other way when an NFL star gets in trouble? Yeah, I think that's probably a factor. But even if you assume that's a factor, there's pro football players are still significantly less likely to be arrested than males of the same age. And it doesn't excuse anything they do, just puts it into perspective.
Greg, in this fractured media time that we live in, football can be thought of as perhaps a sort of national campfire. One of the few things, Super Bowl, the high point of the year, but even each and every Sunday, one of the few things that brings Americans together, and is water cooler talk on Monday. There's not many things anymore where so many people are really locked into the topic.
Yeah, whether you like football or not, the economics of television are going to make football more and more important, because practically everything on television that isn't sports is declining in rating terms. Drama, comedy, reality programming, it's all going downward on a pretty steady slope. People still watch those things, but they don't watch them live. They record them and they watch them at their convenience, and they skip through the commercials. And pro sports, you watch it live and you watch the commercials. And the king of sports is professional football. It just gets more and more. If you're ABC, CBS, NBC, professional football is bigger every year. Just forget the sport itself, just in your economic model, and that phenomenon may continue for some time.
King of sports. Someone should write a book called that. That's a good idea. Gregg Easterbrook did a few years ago. The new one is Game's Not Over. Talk a little present day NFL. Carolina Panthers, great story. And to watch them, man, I don't know if they lose the rest of the way. They don't have any extremely tough opponents. They might go 16-0. And I have been a pretty big critic of Cam Newton in past years, performance-wise on the field. I've seen him this year. He looks like a different quarterback. It's not as if he has the all-pro surrounding him on the offense. What do you see in your film study, Greg?
Well, the single most important thing in modern NFL football is a franchise-quality quarterback. And Cam Newton, as of this year, finally is a franchise-quality quarterback. And he's a good example of, they stuck with him through those couple of first years that were learning years where he was really not playing all that well, but they stuck with him and they kept him in a stable situation. Compare that, say, to a guy like Johnny Manziel, who is he going to play? Is he not going to play? Is he practicing today? Often you have to live with quarterbacks for at least 2 years, sometimes 3. Drew Brees, his first couple of years, did not play well. And the fact that in that case, San Diego stuck with him until he started to play well. It's working for Cam Newton. They've also got a good quality defense. They have the best set of linebackers in the NFL. They've got a pretty good offensive line. The running backs and receivers are average, but I'd rather have average receivers and a franchise quarterback than the other way around.
Yeah.
And I think the key thing for the Carolina Panthers right now is they desperately need to lose a game, because that monkey on your back of, are we going to go 16-0, that's really irrelevant compared to, are we going to win the Super Bowl? I think it would be healthy for them to lose a game and stop worrying about being undefeated.
And, Greg, one of the big storylines that we'll develop shortly is what will happen with Peyton Manning. Your column from a couple of weeks ago talked about bad endings for NFL stars and other sports as well. Peyton's been hurt. Peyton's been bad this year. Brock Osweiler has played fairly well. What do you think the Broncos do once Peyton Manning is healthy enough to play?
Yeah, on Brett Favre's very last play in the NFL, he was sacked. So far, it's looking like on Peyton Manning's very last play in the NFL, he threw an interception, was yanked out of the game. I think that the Broncos have a better chance in the playoffs if they stay with Osweiler. Peyton's a great guy. We'll be citing his achievements for decades to come, but I think the moment has come when it's best that he doesn't play. And the Broncos, with the defense they've got, they have significant playoff potential. They could meet the Panthers in the Super Bowl.
He's the great Gregg Easterbrook. You're going to want to read his stuff, all of it. Grab all of his books while you're at it, too. Make some great stocking stuffers, including this one, The Game's Not Over in Defense of Football. Greg, thanks for the time this morning.
Thank you for having me.